On the morning of March 12, 1994, a woman named Charlotte Pollis was lying in bed in her house in Girard, Ohio. She was sick. She'd been in the emergency room the night before with a brutal ear infection. She was exhausted. She was in pain. And the doctors told her to rest. So that's what she did. Her husband, Paul, woke up that morning, checked on her, told her he was going to take their 2 kids to run some errands. He said he'd pick her up her prescription on his way back. Charlotte said okay, and she went back to bed. When Paul came home that afternoon, Charlotte was gone. No coat, no shoes, no purse, no nothing. Just gone. Now, Paul had an explanation for everything. He said he'd been out all afternoon with the kids, to the pharmacy, the laundromat, the scrapyard, the grocery store, fast food restaurant, you name it, Paul visited there. He said he drove around looking at houses for sale for a few hours as well, too. But, see, here's the thing. Almost every single part of Paul's story falls apart when you look at it closely. The scrapyard he said he went to, it was closed that day. Nobody at the pharmacy remembered seeing him come in with the kids like he said he did. A neighbor saw him loading something heavy into the trunk of his car with all the doors open, and there were no kids in sight. And Paul? Well, he had scratches all over his elbows, all the way down to his wrists. He said he was installing a hot water tank, but there was no hot water tank installed in the house. Then he changed his story. He said it was from installing drywall in the attic. But Charlotte's brother Ali was the one who helped Paul install that drywall. He said there's no way that those scratches came from it. Ali said those scratches looked like someone been fighting back. Now, 30 years later, Charlotte Pollis is still missing. The police believe they know who's responsible. You probably know who's responsible, but they've never been able to prove it. Along the way, evidence disappeared. Photos went missing. Case files ended up in a dumpster. And Paul's father, who happened to be the assistant coroner for the county, was allegedly telling investigators where they could and couldn't search. This is one of the strangest cases I've ever covered. And I think once you hear the whole thing, you're going to understand why. Now, all that said, let's hop into today's story.
Charlotte Nagy was born in the late 1960s and grew up in a big, close family in the Girard, Ohio area. She was the oldest of 6 kids. And Charlotte was one of those people that everybody loved. She was outgoing, she was funny, she was vibrant. She was the kind of person who would just light up a room when she walked in. She loved to bake, she loved crafts, she loved being around people, and she was incredibly family-oriented. If anybody needed anything, Charlotte was the first person to show up. She'd give you the shirt off her back without even thinking about it. Her younger brother Ali remembers one story that really captures who Charlotte was. They were in study hall at school one day, and a bully, this big kid, about 5'11", 150 pounds, spit on Charlotte. Ali was about 6 foot, 180 pounds at the time, and he jumped out of his chair and took the guy down right there in the hallway. That's the kind of family Charlotte came from. Loyal, protective, tight. The Nagy family took vacations together. They went to Niagara Falls. They went to New York City. They visited the Statue of Liberty. They did everything together, and Charlotte loved every minute of it. But in 1985, when Charlotte was in her late teens, she met a guy named Pollis, and Ali says he didn't like him from day one. Paul Pollis was about a year younger than Charlotte. He lived with his parents not far from the Nagy family, and when Allie first met him, Paul rode his bike to the Nagy house to meet Charlotte. That's a pretty long bike ride, 25 to 30 minutes by car. So at first, Ollie thought, okay, this guy is willing to put in some effort. But something about Paul just didn't sit right with Ollie. At first, Paul seemed like a nice guy, charming, gentleman. He wanted to be with Charlotte, and he seemed happy to be around her. But over time, Ollie noticed Paul started becoming more dominant, more controlling. Charlotte and Paul got engaged. They got married, and within about 4 years they had 2 kids, a daughter named Layla, who was about 3 years old, and a son named Aiden, who was about 15 months old. But Paul wasn't exactly husband of the year. He didn't work. He lived on welfare. He tried to start a landscaping business at one point, but that fell apart. And Allie says Paul had a problem with marijuana, a serious problem. Ollie actually confronted Paul about it one time, told him flat out that if he didn't stop, Ollie was going to come after him once he graduated from the police academy. Paul backed off, for a while. But the bigger issue was how Paul treated Charlotte. Ollie's father used to say to Ollie, "Keep an eye on your sister." And Ollie always wondered, was something going on behind closed doors that the family didn't know about? Charlotte always wore long sleeves. Ollie couldn't tell if Paul was hitting her or not, but the more he thinks about it now, the more he believes something was happening in that house that nobody outside of it could see. About 2 to 3 weeks before Charlotte disappeared, something happened that Ollie has never forgotten. He and his wife were at home one night, it was close to 9:30 p.m., when Charlotte called and asked if they could bring her some Dairy Queen ice cream. So Ollie and his wife grabbed some food from Dairy Queen and drove over to Charlotte's house. When they got there, the kids were asleep. Paul was nowhere to be seen, and Charlotte was sitting there, eating ice cream, talking. And then, out of nowhere, Charlotte said something that stopped Ollie cold. She said, "Ollie, can I ask you something?" He said, "Sure, what's up?" And Charlotte said, "If anything ever happens to me, will you take my kids and raise them?" Ollie was stunned. He said, "Where is that coming from? Is Paul hitting you? Because if he is, I'll go upstairs right now and—" Charlotte cut him off. No, I'm just saying, if anything happens to me, will you take them?" Ollie said yes. Of course he would, without even thinking about it. But then Charlotte said something else. She said, "And there are 2 suitcases of crystal upstairs, my mother's crystal. If anything happens to me, I want you to take those too. Keep them for my kids, or sell them and give them the money." Ollie sat there and looked at his sister and thought, why is she talking like this? He didn't push it. He didn't want to make her uncomfortable. But that conversation stayed with him, and a few weeks later, Charlotte was gone. On Friday, March 11th, 1994, Charlotte was feeling terrible. She had an ear infection so bad that she could barely function. She was dizzy, she was in pain, she couldn't do anything. That evening, Paul's parents came over to watch Layla and Aiden while Paul took Charlotte to the emergency room at St. Elizabeth's Hospital. She was diagnosed with an acute ear infection. They gave her some medication and a prescription to fill the next day, and they sent her home. When Charlotte and Paul got back to the house, Paul's parents left, and Charlotte called her mother. That conversation ended at 1:25 a.m. Charlotte said, "I'll talk to you in the morning," and that was the last time her mother ever spoke to her. The next morning, Saturday, March 12th, Charlotte's mother called the house at around 8:50 a.m. to check on her. Paul answered the phone. He said Charlotte was doing a little bit better, but was still in bed sleeping. Her mother was surprised she was still asleep and asked if she was okay. Paul said the doctors told them the best thing was for her to get some rest. Her mother asked Paul to have Charlotte call her when she woke up. That call never came. And here's where Paul's story gets interesting. Paul says that after the phone call from Charlotte's mother, he went upstairs and checked on Charlotte. He says she was awake by that point. He told her he was going to take the kids and run some errands. He told her to stay in bed and relax. He says he buckled Layla and Aiden into their car seats and left the house around 11 a.m. But Charlotte's mother says she called the house again after that. She called at 10 o'clock. She called at 10:10. She called at 10:20. Nobody answered, and the answering machine didn't pick up. Charlotte's aunt also went by the house that day to check on her. She knocked on the door. Nobody answered. So where was everybody? Here's where it gets really interesting. One of Paul's neighbors, a woman named Nancy Hubbard, was backing out of her driveway at 11:10 a.m. on Saturday morning. As she pulled out, she looked over at Paul's house, and she saw something that didn't match Paul's story at all. Paul had his car backed up right up to the front porch. The trunk was open. All 4 doors were open, and the car was completely packed. Boxes, bags, stuff everywhere. There were no kids in the car, no car seats visible. There was absolutely no way 2 car seats could fit in a car that packed down. Nancy drove past the house slowly, and as she did, Paul looked up at her. And she said the look he gave her was so strange, so eerie, that it scared her. She turned around, went back home, and got her husband. Paul says he had the kids with him the whole time he was out. He says he would never leave them alone in the house or in the car. But Nancy Hubbard says there's no way those kids were in that car at 11:10 a.m. So either Paul is lying about having the kids with him, or Nancy Hubbard is lying. And there's no reason to think Nancy Hubbard is lying. Paul says he left the house around 11 a.m. and didn't come back until about 4 p.m. He says he went to the pharmacy to pick up Charlotte's prescription. He went to the laundromat. He went to a scrapyard. He got burgers at a fast food restaurant, and then he spent a couple of hours driving around looking at houses for sale. But here's the problem. The scrapyard Paul says he went to was closed on Sundays, and closed on Saturdays too, as it turned out. Nobody there saw him. At the pharmacy, Paul says he ran in, dropped off the prescriptions, and ran back out to the car because he had the kids in the car, but he never went back to pick them up. The prescriptions were never filled, and at the laundromat, this is a big one, Paul brought in a comforter to wash, and the person working there noticed something on it. It was a large stain, dark red, and Paul told the employee not to let anyone near that washer while it was running. Think about that. You're doing laundry. You bring in a comforter with a big dark red stain on it, and you tell the employee, don't let anybody touch that machine. Why would you say that? When Paul got home at around 4 p.m., Charlotte wasn't there. He says he wasn't worried at first. He figured she was feeling better and went out for a walk or something. But they only had 1 car, and Paul had it. So how did Charlotte leave? Someone would have had to come pick her up, or she walked out of the house on her own, in her night clothes, with no shoes, no coat, no purse, no money, and no ID, in the middle of an Ohio winter. At around 7:30 p.m., Paul noticed Charlotte's purse was still sitting up on the cabinets. He said she never went anywhere without it. So he started calling around, asking if anyone had seen her, and that's when he called Ali. Ali says when Paul called that evening, something sounded off. Paul sounded strange. Ali thought he might have been under the influence of something. Ali also thought it was weird that Paul was acting so concerned when Charlotte had only been gone for a few hours, especially since Paul hadn't even called the police yet. Charlotte's mother started trying to reach the house that night. She kept calling and calling. Nobody answered. So she called Charlotte's aunt, who lived down the road. The aunt drove over to Paul's house and knocked on the door. Nobody answered. The next morning, Sunday, Charlotte's family showed up at the house in force. Ali's brother, Ali's sister, their mom and dad, and Paul's parents were already there. And that's when things started to get really strange. Charlotte's sister, Amriah, went outside to take a look around the property. There had been a light dusting of snow the night before, and Amriah noticed something immediately. There were 2 sets of footprints in the snow. One set in dress shoes, one set in boots. And they went from a side door of the house out toward a small shed in the backyard, and then back around to the other side of the house. Amriah walked over to the shed, and the doors were bulging out, like something was pushing against them from the inside. There was a padlock on the shed, but the doors weren't flush against the frame. Something was off. So Amriah went back inside and asked Paul for the keys to the shed, and Paul lost it. He got angry. He said, "The shed has nothing to do with Charlotte. I'm not giving you the keys." Charlotte's mother watched this happen. She said Amriah kept asking, and Paul kept getting angrier and angrier. He said the shed just had garden tools and a lawnmower in it. He said the key was on Charlotte's key ring. He said he'd give it to them if he had it, but he wouldn't let anyone open that shed. The next day, Monday, Charlotte's brother Omar came by the house, and when he looked at the shed, the doors were closed normally. They weren't bulging anymore. Omar cut the lock off with a hammer and an axe and opened the shed. Everything inside had been shoved to one side. One entire side of the shed was completely empty, like something had been moved out of there, but whatever it was gone. When Omar went inside the house that morning, he noticed something else. There was an extreme amount of cleaning going on. Paul and his parents were scrubbing everything, from the attic to the basement. They were washing the walls. Paul was doing laundry. He was scrubbing the kitchen floor. Omar said that was completely out of character for Paul. Paul was not a guy who cleaned. Charlotte's mother wondered, what are they cleaning? And why? Paul's mother, Jane, said the only floor she scrubbed was the kitchen floor, and that was because Aiden had dropped food on it. Paul said there was nothing wrong with him and his parents cleaning. He said he likes to live in a clean house, but Omar said he'd never seen Paul clean like that. Ever. And then the Ohio State Bureau of Criminal Investigation, the BCI, came in to search the house. They sprayed it with luminol. That's a chemical that reacts to blood, even blood that's been cleaned up. It glows under ultraviolet light, and the house came back spotless. Captain Ronald Vince of the Girard Police Department said it was very unusual for a house to be that clean. But here's the part that really gets Ali fired up. Paul's father was there during the BCI search, and according to Ali, Paul's father was telling the BCI investigators where they could spray the luminol and where they couldn't. The assistant coroner for the county telling state investigators how to do their jobs. Let's talk about Paul's father for a second. He held a position as the assistant coroner, also called the deputy coroner, for the county where the Pollis family lived. That means he worked directly in the same office that would be involved in investigating any potential homicide in that area. And according to Ali, Paul's father wasn't just present during the BCI search. He was actively controlling it. Ali also says that when Charlotte's family was there that weekend, Paul's father seemed to be coaching Paul, telling him what to say, telling him what not to say. Now, Ali can't prove any of this, but he spent over 30 years watching this case, and that's what he saw. And it gets worse. When Ali went to the Girard Police Department that Sunday morning, he saw something. The police had taken Polaroid photos of Paul's arms, 2 to 4 photos, and Ali saw them. Paul had scratches running from his elbows all the way down to his wrists. Ali asked the officers about it. They said Paul told them he got the scratches from installing a hot water tank. So Ali said, "Let me see the hot water tank." There was no new hot water tank installed in the house. None. So Paul changed his story. He said the scratches were from installing drywall in the attic. But Ali was the one who helped Paul install that drywall. He insulated that attic himself. Ali demonstrated for the officers how those scratches looked. He put his fingers on his own arm and showed them. He said, "Those are defensive scratches. That's what it looks like when someone is fighting back." The officers took note. But those Polaroid photos of Paul's arms, they disappeared. Somewhere between the time the police took them and months later, they were gone. Gone. And the Polaroids weren't the only thing that went missing. About a month after Charlotte disappeared, Ali went back to the house to get some of Charlotte's clothes for the kids and some stuff out of the pantry. While he was there, he noticed things that looked like blood. On the kitchen ceiling, on the master bedroom mattress, on the railing where the mattress sat, on a pillow on the couch, on the curtains covering the back door. Ali took pictures of all of it, dozens of photos. He also found a blanket in a hutch near the front door that had what appeared to be blood on it. He preserved that blanket and brought it to the police department along with a set of the photos. He gave them everything. And then, a few months later, Ali asked the police about the photos. They were gone. So Ali gave them the originals, the second set he'd made copies of. Those disappeared too. And the blanket? Ali never got an update on whether it was tested or not. Now here's the thing that really made Ali's blood boil. The BCI did find something during their search of the house. A small amount of human blood. Not animal blood, human blood. Ali was told that this blood sample was going to be frozen and preserved for future testing. But when he asked about it again later, he was told something completely different. He was told the BCI had accidentally destroyed it. The blood sample was gone, destroyed. And in 1994, DNA testing was just getting started. If that sample had been preserved, today's technology could have told them exactly whose blood it was. But it's gone. About 3 days after Charlotte disappeared, Paul agreed to take a polygraph test. Ali's brother offered to drive him to the police station to take it. So the next morning, Ali's brother showed up at Paul's house to pick him up. Paul wasn't there. His mother told Ali's brother, "He left a note. We don't know where he went." Paul had left a note on the bureau. Part of it read, "I love my wife and would never do anything to harm her intentionally." He would never do anything to harm her intentionally. Think about that word, intentionally. And then Paul vanished for 3 months. Nobody knew where he was. Not the police, not his family, not Charlotte's family. Just his attorney, who said it was client privilege and refused to say anything. Ali's family thought Paul had fled. They thought he knew he was caught and he was running. And when Paul finally came back, he said he just needed time alone. He said people were driving past the house constantly, not to comfort him, just to look. The police arrested Paul for obstructing their investigation, but a judge threw the charges out. The judge said Paul had a Fifth Amendment right to remain silent and that he'd cooperated enough by talking to them initially, and that was it. Ali has spent over 30 years fighting for his sister's case. He organized searches. He did media interviews. He wrote a 3-page article in the local newspaper going after prosecutors. He even got Charlotte's case featured on Unsolved Mysteries back in 1996. thanks to a congressman named Jim Trafficant, who personally wrote a letter to the show on behalf of Charlotte's family. But through all of it, the Girard Police Department kept making mistakes, or at least that's what they called them. Photos disappeared, evidence was destroyed, and then, one night in February of 2005, something happened that Ali will never forget. He got a phone call. It was late, around 9 p.m., and the person on the other end said, "You need to get down to the police station before midnight. Your sister's case files are in the dumpster. They're about to be picked up by the garbage truck." Ali called a buddy. They drove to the police station. They jumped in the dumpster and started digging, and at the bottom, they found boxes and boxes of case files. Charlotte's files were in there, along with files from other cases, 10 to 50 other cases, Ali estimated. Ali called the media. News crews showed up, and then the head detective showed up and demanded Ali turn over the files. They threatened to charge him with theft. Ali refused to come inside without the media present, and eventually he had to give the files back. The police later said a janitor had accidentally thrown them away. A janitor had accidentally thrown police case files into a dumpster. Ali has a hard time believing that, and honestly, so do I. Now, here's something that Charlotte's family has been talking about for years, and it's something that's really hard to sit with. Charlotte's daughter Layla was 3 years old when her mother disappeared. She went to live with Charlotte's parents, Ali's mom and dad. And over the years, Layla started saying things that nobody coached her to say. Charlotte's mother says they had to get rid of all the dark-colored trash bags in their house and switch to light-colored ones, because Layla was terrified of the dark ones. She would scream and cry, and she said, more than once, Mommy was put in a dark trash bag. And then she said something even more disturbing. Grandpa helped Daddy hurt Mommy and put her in trash bags. Now, Paul's attorney has said that Layla was being coached, that Charlotte's family was feeding her information and recording it to use against Paul, and that doing so was psychologically damaging to the child. But Charlotte's family says they never told Layla any of that. They say she came up with it on her own. Charlotte's mother even recorded some of these conversations, and the family believes that Layla witnessed what happened to Charlotte, that whatever happened in that house on March 12, 1994, Layla saw it. There's one more piece to this puzzle that didn't come out until after Charlotte disappeared. While Paul was gone for those 3 months, Charlotte's family went through the house, and in a bedside table drawer they found divorce papers. Charlotte had drawn them up. She was planning to leave Paul, and Ali believes that might have been the motive. Paul found out Charlotte was planning to divorce him, and something happened. Paul's attorney has pushed back on this. He's pointed out that Paul only weighs about 150 pounds, and Charlotte weighed close to 300 pounds. He's argued that there's no way Paul could have physically moved Charlotte's body on his own. But Charlotte's family has an answer to that. The footprints in the snow. 2 sets. One matched Paul's shoes. The other set was larger, possibly his father's. Charlotte's mother believes Paul's parents were either there when it happened, or they were called in afterward to help. And neighbors reported seeing Paul's parents' car parked in front of the house since the night before Charlotte disappeared. And here's one more thing. A few weeks after Charlotte disappeared, Charlotte's family learned that Paul's parents had dug up a concrete floor in their garage. They wouldn't say why. And then, shortly after, they filled it back in. Charlotte's family asked about it. Paul's family refused to answer. Nobody ever explained why that concrete floor was dug up and then filled back in. So what has Paul Pollis been doing for the last 30 years? Not a lot of good. In 2005, he showed up unannounced at the home of the Howland police chief. He gave a false name, and he asked the chief if he knew where Charlotte was. The chief asked Paul to step out of his car. Paul refused. He drove away. Officers arrested him, and when they searched his car, they found a handgun between the driver's seat and the console. In 2005, he was also arrested for domestic violence against his second wife, Deborah. He allegedly slammed a door on her, pushed her to the floor, and threatened to beat her. In 2006, Paul and Deborah were charged with embezzling $1.6 million from a dialysis clinic where she worked. Paul's charges were reduced in exchange for his cooperation, but Deborah was convicted and sentenced to 25 years in prison. In 2007, Paul was convicted for failing to obey a police officer. He didn't show up to his sentencing because he said he'd switched attorneys and wasn't notified. He was eventually located, arrested, and sentenced to 1 year in jail. In 2009, he was sentenced to 18 months in jail after testing positive for marijuana and failing to report to his probation officer. And in 2014, he was arrested again, this time for felony drug possession. He was pulled over for an expired license plate and found with suspected crack cocaine. Paul Pollis has never been charged with anything related to Charlotte's disappearance, but the pattern is hard to ignore. Domestic violence, weapons charges, drug offenses, embezzlement, obstruction, over and over and over again. Charlotte Pollis was 28 years old when she vanished from her home in Girard, Ohio on March 12, 1994. She was a loving mother, a devoted sister, a woman who baked and crafted and loved her family with everything she had. And 30 years later, she is still missing. The police have said they believe they know who is responsible for Charlotte's disappearance, but they have never been able to gather enough evidence to prove it. Evidence that, in many cases, seems to have disappeared right along with Charlotte. Photos of Paul's scratches, blood samples, case files, all of it, gone. And Paul's father, who held a position as the county's deputy coroner, was allegedly in the middle of all of it. Ali Nagy has spent his entire adult life fighting for his sister. He's organized searches, he's gone to the media, he's confronted police. He's done everything a brother could possibly do, and he's still not done. If you have any information about the disappearance of Charlotte Pollis, please contact the Girard Police Department in Ohio, or contact the FBI. Charlotte's family is still searching. They're still demanding answers, and they're not giving up. Neither should we.
All right, everybody, that wraps up the story of Charlotte Pollis. If you enjoyed today's video, please make sure you hit that like button. Share this content, as this is our way to keep these videos alive, keep these cases alive, keep the memory of Charlotte and the hundreds of victims covered in my videos alive. And subscribe, as I try to get at least 4 videos out to you each and every week. Alright, I want to thank you all so much for tuning in. My name's Tony, and I'll see you next time.